The dust settled around Samuel Garrett's boots as he rode into the clearing, his eyes narrowing at the figure tied to the old oak tree. The rope was thick, professional, the kind bounty hunters used when they meant business. The sun was beginning its descent behind the mesas, casting long shadows across the red earth, and Samuel felt a familiar weight in his chest. Another manhunt, another chase, another soul about to meet their fate at the end of a rope. Samuel had been ranching in these parts for 23 years, ever since he'd left the cavalry and sought a quieter life among the cattle and endless sky. He'd built his spread from nothing, raised his children here, buried his wife beneath the cottonwoods by the creek. This land had become his sanctuary, his redemption from a past stained with violence and regret. He'd seen enough death in the war, delivered enough of it himself, and he'd promised Martha on her deathbed that he'd be a better man, a kinder man. But the West had its own ideas about redemption, and sometimes it came calling whether you wanted it or not. The figure tied to the tree was slumped forward, face hidden by a tangle of dark hair matted with blood and dirt. The man's clothes were torn, revealing wounds that spoke of a desperate fight, a long chase through unforgiving country. Samuel dismounted slowly, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip before he stopped himself. Old habits. The war never really left a man, not completely. "You alive?" Samuel called out, his voice rough from years of shouting over wind and cattle. The figure stirred, and a weak voice emerged, barely more than a whisper. "Please, please don't judge me." The words were spoken with such raw desperation that Samuel felt something twist inside his chest. He'd heard men beg before, in battle, in the moments before death found them. But this was different somehow, laden with a grief that transcended fear. Samuel approached cautiously, years of frontier wisdom making him careful even with a bound prisoner. As he drew closer, he could see the rope had been tied with expertise, looped around the tree trunk and the captive's torso in a way that prevented any hope of escape. Whoever had done this knew their work. The bounty hunters must have left their catch here while they went for the marshal, confident their prize wouldn't be going anywhere. He reached for the rope, fingers working at the knots, and that's when he saw the face properly for the first time. His hands froze. His breath caught in his throat. The blood drained from his face as recognition crashed over him like a winter flood. "Dear God," he whispered. "Elizabeth?" The woman before him, this broken and bloodied creature tied like an animal, was not the hardened outlaw he'd expected. She raised her eyes to meet his, and in that moment, Samuel saw everything. Shame, terror, and beneath it all, a pleading so profound it seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. "Mr. Garrett," she breathed. "I didn't think anyone would recognize me anymore." Samuel's mind reeled. Elizabeth Mercer, the schoolteacher's daughter, the girl who used to bring lemonade to the ranch hands during harvest, who sang in the church choir every Sunday, whose laughter had once filled the town square like music. She'd been friends with his own daughter, Sarah, had taught his youngest boy his letters before taking a position at a school 2 territories over. That had been 5, maybe 6 years ago. What in heaven's name had happened to bring her to this? "What have you done, child?" Samuel asked, though his hands were already moving again, working frantically at the ropes. Whatever she'd done, he couldn't leave her tied here like this. His conscience wouldn't allow it. Martha's memory wouldn't allow it. "It was an accident," Elizabeth said, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. "I swear to you, Mr. Garrett, I never meant for anyone to die. He came at me in the night. I was alone at the schoolhouse, grading papers by lamplight, and he broke through the door. I thought he was going to kill me. I thought—" Her voice broke, dissolved into sobs that shook her entire frame. Samuel's fingers finally worked the last knot free, and Elizabeth collapsed forward into his arms. He caught her, feeling how thin she'd become, how her body trembled with exhaustion and fear. Through her broken words, he pieced together the story. A drifter, an attack, a struggle. The lamp overturned, fire spreading through the dry wooden schoolhouse. The man trapped inside and Elizabeth running into the night, too terrified and traumatized to stay, to explain, to face what had happened. "They're saying I murdered him," she whispered against Samuel's shoulder. "They're saying I set the fire deliberately, that I robbed him first. Mr. Garrett, I swear on everything holy I was defending myself. But when I tried to go back, when I tried to tell them what happened, they'd already decided I was a killer. They found his money on me because I grabbed my reticule when I ran, and his coins had spilled into it during the fight. They didn't want the truth. They wanted someone to hang." Samuel helped her to sit against the tree trunk, his mind working through the implications. He knew how justice worked out here, swift, often brutal, and rarely interested in the complications of truth when a simple story would satisfy the mob's need for vengeance. A man was dead, a woman was running, and that was enough for most folks to make up their minds. But Samuel had learned something in his years of trying to be a better man. He'd learned that judgment was a heavy thing, that the weight of deciding another person's worth or guilt could crush a soul if you let it. He'd carried enough death on his conscience from the war, from battles where he'd followed orders without question, without mercy. He'd promised Martha he'd be different. He'd promised God the same on the day they lowered her into the ground. "Listen to me, Elizabeth," Samuel said, his voice steady with decision. "Those bounty hunters will be back within the hour, maybe less. We don't have much time. What are you doing?" she asked, her eyes widening. "Mr. Garrett, you can't help me. They'll hang you, too. They'll take your ranch, your children." "My children are grown," Samuel interrupted gently. "And I've been looking for a way to square my accounts with the Almighty for more years than I care to count." "Maybe this is it." He moved quickly to his horse, pulling supplies from his saddlebags. "Canteen, dried meat, a small pouch of coins. There's a trail about 2 miles north that leads up into the high country. Old mining camps up there, abandoned now. You can hide there until this blows over, until cooler heads prevail." "It won't blow over," Elizabeth said, but she was accepting the supplies with shaking hands. "You know it won't. They've made up their minds. Then you stay hidden until I can get word to a federal marshal, someone who will actually investigate what happened." Samuel was working as he spoke, using his knife to cut away pieces of his own shirt, wrapping them around Elizabeth's wounds. "Someone who'll talk to the people at the school, who'll look at the evidence properly. These bounty hunters, they don't care about truth. But the law is bigger than them, Elizabeth. It has to be." He helped her onto his horse, then tied the rope back around the tree trunk in a loose approximation of how it had been. From a distance in the fading light, it might fool someone for a few minutes. Not long, but maybe long enough. "Why are you doing this?" Elizabeth asked, looking down at him from the saddle. "After everything they're saying about me?" Samuel looked up at her, this broken young woman who'd once been full of light and promise, and he thought about all the times he'd followed orders without question in the war. All the times he'd been too certain, too quick to judge, too ready to believe that the world was simple and justice was clear. He thought about Martha, who'd seen the good in him even when he couldn't see it himself, who'd taught him that mercy was stronger than judgment, that kindness was braver than cruelty. "Because I'm trying to be the man my wife believed I could be," he said simply. "Because I've seen what happens when good people stand by and let fear make their decisions for them. Because you asked me not to judge you, and I realized that's exactly what I've been doing my whole life, judging without knowing, deciding without understanding. Maybe it's time I tried something different." Elizabeth's tears fell freely now, but they were different tears. Tears of gratitude and disbelief that kindness could still exist in a world that had shown her so much cruelty. "I'll never forget this, Mr. Garrett. Whatever happens to me, I'll never forget." "You just stay alive, child," Samuel said. "Stay hidden, stay safe, and trust that truth has a way of coming out eventually. It may take time, but it comes out." He slapped the horse's flank, sending it trotting toward the northern trail. Elizabeth looked back once, her silhouette against the darkening sky, and then she was gone. Samuel stood alone in the clearing, listening to the sound of approaching horses. The bounty hunters would be angry. There would be questions, accusations, maybe worse. But as he stood there in the fading light, Samuel felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Peace. The deep, abiding peace that comes from making a choice that your soul knows is right, regardless of the cost. He thought of Martha, and he hoped she could see him now. Hoped she knew that he'd finally learned the lesson she'd spent their years together trying to teach him. that mercy was stronger than judgment, that sometimes the bravest thing a person could do was to choose kindness in a world that demanded cruelty, that every soul deserved the chance to tell their story, to be heard, to be understood before being condemned. The horses emerged from the trees, and Samuel turned to face them. His shoulders squared, his conscience clear. Whatever came next, he would face it knowing he'd finally become the man he'd always wanted to be. The man who untied the rope instead of tightening it. The man who chose to believe in redemption because he'd needed it himself so desperately all these years. In the end, that was what the West had taught him. Not that justice was simple or that truth was obvious, but that every person carried their own burden of pain and circumstance, and that the measure of a man wasn't found in how quickly he could judge others, but in how willing he was to offer them grace.